Ja, herzlich willkommen. Schön, dass ihr da seid. Auf der Highend 2024 und ihr seht es im Hintergrund. Ich gehe jetzt rein zu Steven Wilson. Zusammen mit PMC haben wir hier was aufgebaut. Dolby Atmos, Immersive. Mit der Steven Tracks spielen, die er selbst gemastert, geremixed hat auf diese Art und Weise. Und da wurde schon ziemlich Aufwand betrieben mit PMC zusammen. Irgendwie 300.000 Euro kostet das Ganze, eine riesen Traverse gezogen. Ihr werdet es gleich ein bisschen sehen. Ihr hört den Steven vielleicht gleich so ein paar Ausschnitte reden und ich werde mich gleich wieder mit meinen Eindrücken.
Good morning.
Morning, morning.
Thank you very much for coming. So my name is Steven Wilson. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a musician, but I'm also someone that's very, very passionate and very involved in the world of spatial audio. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, spatial audio. I'm sure some of you are familiar with spatial audio. Maybe some of you have never heard it before, other than maybe going to see Star Wars at the cinema. That'd be your only experience of spatial audio, or maybe listening to something on binaural headphones. That's not what today is about, as you'll soon find out. So being so passionate about that, my plan today is to try and infect as many of you as possible with my enthusiasm for spatial audio. So spatial audio has been around for a long time now as a principle. Back in the 1950s, one of my heroes, the German composer Karlheinz Stockhausen, wrote pieces of music where he distributed the musicians around the audience and essentially had the musicians pass music around the room. What an innovator. Talk about being ahead of your time. And then in the 70s we had quadraphonic, in the 90s 5.1, and now we have things like Dolby Atmos. Dolby Atmos is not the only spatial audio format, but it's certainly the one that's becoming the most dominant, particularly as Apple have adopted it, and hopefully some point Spotify also will adopt Dolby Atmos, and that will certainly take it even more so into the mainstream, because it's never been more mainstream than it is now. There's still a way to go, but for example, 92 of the top 100 best-selling albums in America last year were also released in Dolby Atmos, which was almost unthinkable in the days of quadraphonic and 5.1. So it's never been bigger than it is now, is basically what the message we take from that, and hopefully still growing. And still, many people are very skeptical about spatial audio. Musicians, labels, artists, and listeners alike. So I'm going to ask you now for a little show of hands. Who here is very passionate about stereo, but is skeptical about spatial? Be honest. Okay, thank you. And if I said to you that stereo is also spatial?
Yes, of course.
Of course it is. The moment you have sound coming from more than one place, by definition, that is spatial audio. So this is merely an extension, in a sense, of that principle of moving from mono to stereo. This is the next step, at least that's the way I see it. But it's not for me to convince you by talking. I'm going to play you some music today. We're going to listen to 10 examples of spatial audio today, all mixed by myself. None of these, just so you understand, none of these are upmixed from the original stereo. All of these were created from the original multi-track tapes. So I had to rebuild the mixes, all the EQ, all the compression, all the reverberation, any other processing, any level changes inherent in the original mixes are all honoured in the spatial version of the mix that I've created. All of these are Dolby Atmos mixes. By the way, we're going to have a question and answer session at the end, if that's okay. So if you have any questions, feel free to save them up for the end. One other thing I wanted to mention, I'm going to state the obvious, that there's only one sweet spot in this room to hear the mix exactly as I would like it to be heard. And that gentleman there with the glasses is in that. Yeah, you say. And the gentleman behind you, you've got the sweet spot.
That's the lucky man.
So some of you are inevitably going to have too much of one speaker.
Space on your lap.
But that's also true of stereo too. I'm just pointing that out, you know. There's a sweet spot for stereo too, isn't there? So that's always the case. The first piece I'm going to play you is a piece I always play to people that have never heard Dolby Atmos or spatial audio before, because it kind of shows off in a very showy, gimmicky way what it can be about. And this is a little extract from a piece of music by a British progressive rock band called Gentle Giant from the 70s. It's a very discreet and aggressive use of spatial audio. It'll get you used to the idea of what we're going to be listening to today. Okay, let's roll. questions? Yes, you, sir, with the very heavy metal T-shirt on. Ah. Yes, that's you, sir. Yes, hail Satan, or whatever it says.
Hail Sagan.
Sagan. Ah, yes.
So I'm familiar only with Staircase from here, and I have the Blu-ray, which has 6 and 8 tracks. What did you play here? Which tracks from that Blu-ray, or is it a special mix?
No, this is the version that's on the Blu-ray.
But there are more than 8 speakers in the room.
Well, this is a question for you guys. So I mixed it on a 7.1.4 system in my studio. But the whole point of Atmos, and this is where I get a little bit out of my depth, is object orientated. So if I choose to position a sound here, for example, whichever speaker configuration, these guys will correct me if I'm wrong, whichever speaker configuration is in the room, the system will work out how best to make it sound like it's coming from there. That's kind of about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The beauty of it is you can then scale it up. So you can have a room with 100 speakers in it, and it will still position.
And it would find out how best to use those 100 speakers to make it sound like it's coming from exactly there. Obviously, the more speakers you had, the more precise it can be in terms of positioning. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Are you working with convolution reverberation, and how do you use the center channel, especially regarding vocals?
Okay, so that's 2 different questions. So very quickly, so the first question, I actually only work with stereo reverbs. I know there are surround reverbs, but because I'm working with quite complex layered music, I prefer to still retain stereo reverbs. I think that the spatial audio reverbs are fantastic if you've got like a single instrument and you want to create this impression of incredible space and multi-dimensional reverbs. It doesn't really apply with I find, with the kind of music I work on. The second question, the lead vocal, I tend to have it sounding like it's coming from the center channel, but actually it's not only coming from the center channel. Because if you just put it in the center channel, I feel the glue that kind of binds it to the rest of the track disappears. It begins to sound a bit lonely. So actually, although the impression you have is it's coming from the center channel, it's actually also in all the other speakers too. Just a little bit, if that makes sense. And I find that glues it better into the mix. But these are all things I've kind of discovered by trial and error over the years of what works best. Yeah. Question, yeah. Sir at the back, yeah.
Thank you. Living inside the obvious panning, which kind of processor do you use in studio for Dolby Atmos?
So I use Dolby's own panner, and I use the Dolby renderer. So I'm working within Logic as my workstation.
Yeah.
But I bridge out from Logic through to the Dolby renderer, and I use the Dolby panner. The reason I use the Dolby panner is because of the sequencer.
Yeah.
They've got as you probably know, so as you're asking the question, they have a fantastic sequencer that enables you to automate moves and things like that in quite a sophisticated way. So I love using the Dolby software integrated into Logic.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, guys.
So, da bin ich wieder. Das Ganze ist vorbei. Ja, was soll ich sagen? Er hat insgesamt 10 Tracks gespielt, glaube ich. Der letzte war einer von seinen eigenen, also da war wirklich alles dabei, genremäßig. Und ich dachte so die ganze Zeit, ja, verstehe ich, aber hat für mich alles so irgendwie Kino-Flair. Ich weiß nicht, wie ich sagen soll. Mir fehlte da so das Erlebnis, die Magie, die ein Stereosystem macht, in dem eigentlich nur 2 Lautsprecher eine auch teilweise dreidimensionale Abbildung machen, nach links, rechts, nach vorne, hinten. Die Magie hat mir da gefehlt, weil es ja offensichtlich war, weil da so viele Lautsprecher hangen, offensichtlich war, wo es herkommt. Da hat mir, ja, wie gesagt, ein bisschen die Magie gefehlt, aber bis zu dem Track tatsächlich Aha, Take on Me, habe ich gar nicht damit gerechnet mit so einem Track, aber das hat mich recht abgeholt. Ich habe irgendwie das Gefühl gehabt, sowas in die Richtung von Musik, wo auch ein bisschen elektronischer Anteil drin ist, dafür ist das Thema wirklich gemacht und auch der nächste Track danach, das war der letzte Track von ihm, das hat auch super gepasst irgendwie. Also diese älteren Tracks, King Crimson war zum Beispiel dabei oder The Who, das hat mich irgendwie nicht so abgeholt, aber dann, wie gesagt, Take On Me, dann habe ich es irgendwie verstanden. Ne? Aber trotzdem, Stereo bleibt mein Thema. Ja, natürlich hätten Soundbeispiele hier noch weniger Sinn gemacht, wie Stereoanlagen abzufilmen. Deswegen natürlich keine Soundbeispiele und ihr wisst ja, wie es mit Musik auf YouTube ist. Ich hoffe, ihr habt trotzdem einen kleinen Eindruck davon ein bisschen bekommen, für die alle, die nicht da sein können. Ja, ansonsten vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen, bis zum nächsten Video. Bis dann.